My grandson thought I was too old to notice the forgery, but I built my life reading contracts line by line, and when I uncovered what he did, I set a trap that made him lose everything. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Richard Alden, and I am 78 years old. For most of my life, people knew me not for who I was at home but for what I built outside of it. I ran a small but steady contracting business in Portland for 4 decades. My hands shaped half the houses on the east side of town, roofs, porches, staircases that families still walk today. I carried calluses long before I carried grandchildren. But when my wife, Margaret, passed 10 years ago, the walls of this old colonial became too quiet. The laughter she used to pour into every corner vanished, and for the first time in my life, I understood the cruelty of silence. What saved me then was family, or what I thought was family. My daughter, Sharon, became my anchor. She was 42 when her mother died, already married, already a mother herself. I had always worried she leaned too much on her husband, Martin, who died young in a car accident. That left Sharon to raise 2 children, Dylan and Emily, while I stood behind her as best I could. I stepped into the fatherly role for them as much as I could, the way Margaret would have wanted me to. Dylan, my grandson, was the eldest. From the beginning, he was headstrong, sharp, the kind of boy who always wanted to win, whether it was a school debate or a game of Monopoly. I paid for his summer camps, his first car, even his tuition when he wanted to start fresh at a university 3 states away. He always reminded me of Martin, ambitious, sometimes too ambitious for his own good. Then there was Emily, my granddaughter, 10 years younger than Dylan. Where Dylan was impatient and calculating, Emily was light itself. She was the one who still came over to bake cookies in my kitchen, still asked to hear stories about her grandmother, still drew me little cards with flowers on them. To Emily, I wasn't just Grandpa. I was safety, I was tradition, I was family. And Sharon, my daughter, was somewhere between them. After Martin died, she grew hardened. Practical. Always measuring survival in numbers, bills paid, meals cooked, appearances kept. She loved me, I knew, but her love came through obligations rather than warmth. She called me twice a week, came by once every other Sunday, and left with leftovers and laundry folded. Still, I trusted them all. I thought I could depend on them. My whole life had been about providing, building not just houses but a foundation for those I loved. Every savings account, every bond, every insurance policy was meant to ensure my family would never have to start from nothing the way Margaret and I once had. But trust is the one resource you cannot rebuild once it collapses. And I learned that the hard way. It started the day after my 78th birthday. The house still carried the smell of candle wax and buttercream, though the balloons my granddaughter Emily had taped to the doorway were already beginning to sag. The cake sat on the counter, a chocolate layer cake with thick white frosting, decorated with shaky lettering that read "Happy Birthday, Grandpa." Emily had begged Sharon to let her bake it mostly on her own. She had, and it showed. One side leaned slightly, like a tired soldier, but I thought it was the most beautiful cake I had ever seen. I had only taken a single slice, because Emily insisted on watching me eat it. Her eyes, wide with that mixture of pride and worry children get when they want approval, never left my face as I chewed. I exaggerated my delight, made a great show of patting my stomach, and she grinned like the sun had broken through the kitchen windows. But when Emily was upstairs washing frosting off her fingers, my daughter Sharon and her son Dylan exchanged one of those glances across the table. I knew that glance, quick, practiced, full of words left unsaid. They had given me polite smiles, hugs that felt like they were measuring the minimum required affection, and then left. No lingering conversation on the porch, no promises to come by next week. Just the sound of their car rolling down the drive, leaving behind an odd aftertaste of distance that even Emily's laughter couldn't wash away. That night, when the house fell quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The half-eaten cake was still on the counter, a silent reminder of the family that was slipping away from me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that age makes you sensitive to small things. But something gnawed at me, that hollow, brittle politeness in Sharon's hug, the way Dylan avoided my eyes when I pressed $20 into his hand, the rehearsed, "Thanks, Grandpa," that sounded more like a line in a play than gratitude. 2 mornings later, the mailman came. I was in the front yard trimming the rosebush Margaret had planted decades ago. My knees ached as I bent to gather the clippings, and when I straightened, the mail truck was already pulling away. A thin stack of envelopes lay in the box, utility bill, advertisement, and one heavy cream envelope from my bank. At first, I thought it was a quarterly statement. But when I tore it open at the kitchen table, the words on the page made my stomach drop into ice water. This letter confirms the recent change of beneficiary on your investment accounts. My vision blurred for a moment. I read it again, slower this time. The accounts, the ones Margaret and I had built over 40 years of careful saving, the ones meant to secure Emily's education, to keep Sharon comfortable in her later years, they had been altered. The beneficiary had been changed. I stared at my own name on the letterhead, printed in black ink. Then at the neat paragraphs of financial jargon, sterile as hospital walls. But the one truth screamed louder than the rest. I had not signed anything. My hand trembled as I set the letter down, the edges of the paper biting into my skin. My breath came shallow, uneven. I had balanced checkbooks by candlelight in the 70s, pored over every contract in my business days, triple-checked every insurance renewal. I was not a careless man. And I knew, absolutely knew, that no such document had ever crossed my desk. For the first time in years, the walls of the house felt like they were closing in. I pressed my palm flat against the table, staring at the frosting-stained cake plate still sitting by the sink. Emily's crooked lettering swam before my eyes. Someone in my family had stolen my hand. Someone had forged me. I didn't rush to the phone. That's not my way. My whole life I've believed in sitting with a problem first, turning it over like a carpenter examines a warped board, looking for where the grain went wrong. So I sat there in my kitchen, the morning light falling across the letter. My eyes ran over the lines again and again, and every time I read change of beneficiary, my pulse quickened. I laid out my reading glasses, grabbed a notepad from the drawer, and wrote down every detail, the date of the change, the branch location, the contact person listed at the bottom. Then I pushed the chair back and went to my desk in the study. For years, I'd kept a ledger, my own handwritten record of every deposit, withdrawal, account update. Margaret used to tease me about it, said I was running a small-town treasury instead of a household. But that ledger had never lied to me. I pulled it from the drawer, flipped to the last entry, and confirmed what I already knew, there had been no recent change. That was when the unease in my chest shifted into anger. I pulled open my filing cabinet. Folders lined the drawers, each labeled in Margaret's neat cursive, insurance, utilities, investments, taxes. I flipped through the investment folder. Every signature, every initial was mine, strong, deliberate, the underline beneath my name like a carpenter's final strike of the hammer. The forgery in the letter lacked that underline. That missing line might seem small to anyone else, but to me it was like seeing my own face in a mirror with the eyes wrong. I thought back to the birthday. Sharon had hovered in the kitchen longer than usual, pretending to tidy up. Dylan had asked where I kept my old fountain pen, an odd request, but I'd laughed it off, handed it to him, and thought nothing of it. Now, the puzzle pieces slid into place with a cruel click. By noon, I could no longer sit still. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. The walk to the garage felt heavier than it should have. I slid behind the wheel of my Buick, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The drive to the bank took 11 minutes. I counted every stoplight. I'd walked through those glass doors for decades, the tellers greeting me by name, asking about my garden or Margaret's lemon bars. But that morning, stepping into the cool air of the lobby, I felt none of the warmth. Only suspicion. Only the need for answers. A young teller smiled at me from behind the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Alden. How can we help you today?" I set the envelope on the counter, my voice steady but sharper than usual. "I'd like to speak with the branch manager. This concerns a change to my investment accounts. A change I did not authorize." The smile faltered. Within minutes, I was ushered into a glass-walled office where the manager, Mr. Holbrook, adjusted his tie nervously as he skimmed the letter. He tapped his pen against the desk once, then twice, then looked up at me with that strained politeness bankers wear when they know a storm is about to break. "Mr. Alden," he said, "the form was submitted in person. We had a signature on file. It matched." Matched? My voice cracked louder than I intended. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my ledger, and slapped it open on the desk. "This is my signature. 40 years of consistency. And this," I pointed at the copy of the form he slid toward me, "is an imitation. A poor one. Whoever filed this doesn't know me half as well as they think they do." Holbrook cleared his throat. "I see. If you'll allow me a moment, I can check our records for the person who delivered the documents." He typed into his computer, the clack of keys echoing in the small office. Then he paused, eyes narrowing slightly at the screen. "It was your grandson. Dylan." The room seemed to tilt. I had braced for this, half suspected it, but hearing his name spoken aloud, in that sterile banking voice, was something different. Something final. The moment the word Dylan left Holbrook's mouth, the air in the office turned thick. My grandson's name, spoken like it belonged on some transaction log instead of on a Christmas card, pressed into my chest like a weight. I leaned forward, both palms flat on the polished desk. "Read that back to me," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. Holbrook hesitated, but protocol won out. "The form was submitted last Thursday afternoon by Dylan Carter. Identification was provided. We scanned his driver's license with the paperwork." Identification? I nearly laughed. So my own grandson pretends to represent me, forges my name, and that's good enough. The banker flinched but didn't look away. It's not uncommon for family members to handle these matters. Especially if, he stopped short. Especially if what? If I looked too old. Too weak. I straightened slowly, the bones in my back cracking like firewood. "You'll leave these accounts exactly as they were. Every designation, every percentage, untouched. Am I clear?" "Yes, of course." Holbrook nodded quickly. "We'll freeze any pending changes immediately." "Good." I folded the forged form with deliberate care and slid it into my jacket. "I'll need copies of everything Dylan signed. Originals, scans, timestamps. And I want them certified." He blinked. "Certified? May I ask?" "You may not." My voice cut sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. "Just make sure I have them. Today." Holbrook scribbled notes, already sending instructions to his assistant. His hand trembled slightly as he pushed a pen across the desk for my acknowledgement receipt. I signed it in bold strokes, pressing hard enough to tear the paper. And as I lifted the pen, a thought flickered in my mind, a cold, calculated thought I hadn't entertained in years. If Dylan wanted to forge papers, I would show him what real paperwork looked like. Legal, binding, ironclad. He thought he was clever, but I had built my life on blueprints and contracts. And there is one thing every builder knows, a foundation built on lies will eventually collapse. I sat back, forcing a small smile for Holbrook's benefit. "You'll keep this matter confidential." "I'll handle my family." "Yes, sir." I rose, slipping the envelope of documents under my arm. The glass walls of the office reflected me back at myself, an old man, stooped but unbroken, walking out with evidence of betrayal tucked close to his heart. By the time I pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the late morning air, the anger had cooled into something far more dangerous. Not rage. Not despair. Strategy. They wanted me blind and frail. They thought my age made me an easy mark. But I had spent decades drawing contracts so tight not even sunlight could slip through them. And now, I would draw one more, a plan to strip away their schemes piece by piece until Dylan and Sharon had nothing left but the memory of how thoroughly I outplayed them. The revenge didn't start tomorrow. It started now. I did not drive straight home from the bank. My Buick turned itself down Hawthorne Avenue, where my attorney's office still stood between the florist and the barber shop. I'd known Thomas Becker since the 70s. He was fresh out of law school when he helped me draw up contracts for my first construction company. Now he was gray-haired, slow on the stairs, but still sharper than most men half his age. When his secretary led me in, Thomas looked up from a stack of briefs and gave me a long, knowing stare. "Richard. You don't usually drop by without calling." I set the envelope on his desk. "My grandson forged my signature. Tried to take my accounts." His brows shot up, but he didn't waste time with pity. He slid the papers out, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. 10 minutes passed with only the sound of rustling pages and his occasional grunt. Finally, he set the documents down and steepled his fingers. "This is sloppy work. The signature is weak, the timing obvious. But you're right, it could have slipped through. If Dylan had gotten away with it once, he'd have tried again. And next time, he might have been smarter. That's why I'm here," I said. "I want to make sure he never gets another chance. Sharon too, she's in on this." I could see it in her face at the birthday dinner. "She knows more than she's saying." Thomas nodded. "So what do you want, Richard? Protection? Prosecution? Or payback?" I leaned forward, my voice low. "I want control. I want them to think they've outsmarted me, until the moment the ground disappears under their feet." A slow smile crept across his face. "Then you've come to the right man." For the next hour, we laid out the plan like engineers drafting blueprints. Every account I owned would be transferred into a living trust, not under my name alone, but under trustees I could trust implicitly. Emily, my granddaughter, would be the sole beneficiary. Sharon and Dylan's names would vanish from every page, every clause. But that was only the first step. "I want a decoy," I told him. "Documents that look real enough to tempt them. A will that says Dylan inherits the house, the accounts, even the old lake property. Something they can't resist getting their hands on." Thomas chuckled, already scribbling notes. "A paper trap. Let them steal the bait while the real assets sit behind locks they'll never reach." Exactly. I sat back, feeling the old thrill of strategy one hadn't tasted in years. If they think they're winning, they'll show their hand. And when they do, I want every word, every forgery, every lie on record. Ironclad evidence. By the time I left his office, the afternoon sun was low, painting the streets gold. I walked to my Buick with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just set the first domino in a line that would stretch farther than his betrayers could see. They wanted to play games with paper. They were about to learn that paper was my battlefield. The trap began in my study, late at night, with nothing but the desk lamp burning. The light pooled over the mahogany surface, highlighting stacks of papers I'd asked Thomas to draft. Some were ironclad, the real trust documents, airtight and filed already. But others were decoys, crafted with just enough truth to feel authentic, just enough bait to lure a greedy hand. I spent hours arranging them. A draft will that named Dylan as sole heir. A letter to my financial advisor suggesting I was losing track of numbers and needed Sharon to manage them. Even a note scribbled in my own hand, strategically sloppy, must finalize changes soon, before health worsens. I didn't have to forge anything. I simply used my own pen, my own habits, to make the pages look real. And then I did the most important thing, I left them where Dylan would find them. The old briefcase Margaret had given me on our 15th anniversary sat in the corner of the study. Worn leather, brass clasps, always locked, until now. I tucked the bait papers inside, left it slightly ajar, and slid it under the desk. A child could have spotted it. All that was left was patience. And patience meant enduring family dinners like a poker player waiting on the perfect hand. The following Sunday, Sharon came with Dylan and Emily. She brought a casserole that tasted rushed, more obligation than care, and filled the kitchen with talk about grocery prices, school fees, car repairs, money, money, money. Dylan sat quiet for most of the meal, scrolling through his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. Emily was the only bright spark at the table, telling me about her art project, her teacher, how she wanted to try painting portraits. "Grandpa, will you sit for me?" she asked, eyes shining. "Of course," I said, my throat tightening. "But you'll have to promise not to paint me too handsome. It'll confuse people." She giggled, and for a moment the house felt alive again. But when she went upstairs to fetch her sketchbook, Sharon leaned in. "Dad," she said, her voice low, "you've been keeping up with your paperwork, haven't you? We worry, you know. Things can get complicated if you don't stay on top of it." I sipped my coffee slowly, buying time. "Complicated for who, Sharon? Me? Or you?" Her cheeks colored. She forced a laugh. "For everyone. You know what I mean." Dylan finally looked up from his phone, his eyes flicking to me, then to the hall that led to my study. It was a glance so quick most men wouldn't have caught it. But I did. I'd spent a lifetime reading blueprints, contracts, the fine print others missed. One glance was all I needed. After dessert, while I pretended to doze in the recliner, I heard floorboards creak down the hall. The study door clicked softly. A pause. Then the faint scrape of brass clasps opening. I kept my eyes closed, breathing slow, the picture of an old man napping. But inside, my pulse beat like a drum. The bait had been taken. The trap was closing. When Sharon and Dylan finally left, the casserole dish under her arm, I walked back to the study. The briefcase was empty. Papers gone. Exactly as planned. I sat at the desk, hands folded, and allowed myself a small, cold smile. They thought they had stolen my future. But all they'd taken was a pile of paper that would lead them straight into the fire. The week after they stole the bait, the house grew eerily quiet. Sharon didn't call. Dylan didn't text. No Sunday dinner, no casserole dropped off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That silence told me more than words ever could. They were busy. Busy plotting with the papers they thought were my undoing. I spent those days finishing my preparations. The real trust documents were already filed with Thomas, recorded in the county registry. Emily's name was safe, sealed under law so tight not even Sharon's cleverest lawyer could pry it open. Then Thomas and I took the final step. We flagged every one of my accounts for fraud monitoring and informed the bank president himself. If Dylan tried to wave those fake papers again, alarms would sound before his mouth finished the lie. The police were quietly briefed. All we needed was for him to walk into the trap. And right on schedule, he did. Friday morning, I received the call from the bank. "Mr. Alden," Holbrook's voice was clipped but urgent, "your grandson is here. He's attempting to execute new beneficiary documents. They don't match our filings." I gripped the receiver. "Keep him there. I'll be right over." When I pulled into the bank's parking lot, Thomas was already waiting, suit pressed, briefcase in hand. His eyes gleamed with the kind of satisfaction only a lawyer gets when the case is already won. "You ready, Richard?" "As ready as I've ever been." Inside, Dylan sat across from Holbrook, grinning like a man who thought he'd pulled off the heist of the century. Sharon was beside him, lips tight, trying to look composed but failing, her eyes darting nervously to the documents spread across the desk. The moment I stepped into the glass office, Dylan's smirk faltered. "Grandpa," he said too quickly, "we were just helping with your accounts. You forgot a few things." "Forgot?" I echoed, my voice calm, almost amused. I set my hand on Thomas's briefcase. "Son, you've forgotten who taught you to read in the first place. Who walked you through your first contract for that used Honda. Who underlined every paper he ever signed." Thomas laid out the real documents, notarized, time-stamped, legally bulletproof. "This," he said, tapping the trust papers, "is Mr. Alden's estate. Executed weeks ago. Sole beneficiary, Emily Carter. No one else." Sharon's face drained of color. Dylan sputtered, rifling through his stolen papers. "No, that's not possible. I've got the originals." Holbrook cut him off, his voice suddenly hard. "Those are forgeries, Mr. Carter. And forging financial documents is a felony." The door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, badges glinting. Sharon gasped, half rising from her chair. Dylan froze, his confidence leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. "Dylan Carter," one officer said. "You're under investigation for attempted fraud and forgery. We'll need you to come with us." The sight of my grandson's hands being cuffed was not what I ever wanted. But it was what he had earned. Sharon reached for him, whispering his name, her voice trembling. She looked at me then, eyes wide, pleading. "Dad, you can stop this. Please." I shook my head slowly. "No, Sharon. You stopped this when you chose greed over family. You dug this hole together. Now you can watch how deep it goes." They led Dylan out, his head bowed, Sharon trailing after in stunned silence. The papers, my trap, lay scattered on the desk like ashes after a fire. Thomas closed his briefcase, his tone dry. "Well. That's that." I stood a little taller than when I'd walked in, my cane forgotten against the wall. For the first time in weeks, I breathed easy. Emily's future was safe. And the rest of the family? They had finally learned what Margaret always told me, back when we built this life together. A house built on lies cannot stand. That evening, after the bank, the lawyer, and the police, I returned to the house. The kitchen was still as I had left it, cake plate by the sink, the hum of the old refrigerator, Margaret's photograph watching from the mantel. For once, the silence didn't suffocate me. It felt earned, like the calm after a storm when you know the roof held. I poured myself a glass of scotch, the good bottle I'd been saving. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd first opened that cursed letter, and let the amber light catch the glass. I thought of Dylan, his face twisted in shock as the handcuffs closed. I thought of Sharon, her voice trembling, begging me to stop. There was no joy in seeing them fall. No grandfather wants that. But there was justice. And justice, when it finally arrives after years of trust and sacrifice, is sweeter than forgiveness. I glanced at the briefcase in the corner, the empty shell of the trap I had set. For years, I'd carried that thing like a burden. Tonight, it looked like a trophy. Proof that age doesn't mean weakness. That experience is still sharper than youth's ambition. Later, Emily came by. She'd heard whispers, children always do, but I didn't tell her everything. I only said, I did what I had to make sure you'll be safe one day. She hugged me, her arms small but fierce. I know, Grandpa. When she left, I stayed by the window, watching the street grow dark, the lamplight spilling across the roses I'd trimmed that morning. I thought of Margaret's voice, the one that always carried me through the hardest nights. Protect what matters, Richard. Protect the ones who still love you true. I raised my glass toward her photograph. They thought they could steal my life, Margaret. But all they stole was their own future. And as the scotch burned warm down my throat, I felt it at last, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been betrayed, had been underestimated, and had struck back not with fists, but with patience, paper, and truth. Sweet justice. Mine at last. I only smiled. I was guarding the truth that betrayal has a price, and sometimes, the sweetest justice is simply living well enough to watch your enemies choke on their own schemes.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to the story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.